Welcome to Madang Podcast, hosted by the Christian Century. Today's special guest is Renee Hill, who is an author, creator coach, and founder of the Inner Story Writing Circle. Today, she shares how writing saved her, about mental health, expressive writing, a 4-step creative process, and her new book, Story Work. Please stay tuned. Please join Homebrewed Christianity's Theology Beer Camp in St. Paul, Minnesota this October for a 3-day theological experience. It brings together theology nerds and craft beer for a blend of intellectual engagement, community building, and lots of fun. Go to www.theologybeercamp2025.com to save your spot. Also join Homebrewed Christianity's online class, God of Justice. Across our communities and the world, there is a growing recognition of deep-rooted injustices and an urgent passion for creating a more beautiful, equitable world. How do we move forward? Please visit www.homebrewedchristianity.com to register for this important online class, God of Justice. This episode of Madang Podcast is brought to you by the support of Broadleaf Books. In Story Work, memoirist Renee Hill invites readers to the transformative practice of creative self-discovery. Through essays and prompting questions, Gigi uses the raw material of her own story of being raised by a schizophrenic mother to help readers take action and reclaim the power of their own narrative. Please visit www.broadleafbooks.com to order Story Work and to view all of Broadleaf Books' important, powerful, and exciting books.
For sponsorship inquiries, please email madangpodcast.gmail.com. This is Madang, an outdoor living room for guests to share their experiences and their work. I invite you to come in and stay for a while.
Welcome to Madang Podcast. Today's special guest is Renee Hill, who's an author whose books have helped thousands of people overcome the emotional obstacles keeping them from living fully expressed lives. Her books include 2 guided journals, Self-Care Check-In, and A Year of Self-Reflection, as well as her debut prose book, Story Work, Field Notes on Self-Discovery and Reclaiming Your Narrative. Gigi is a creative coach and founder of the Inner Story Writing Circle, a membership community for writers and creatives seeking guidance, support, and tools for the heart-centered working of writing about their lives. Thank you, Gigi, so much for writing your book and for coming on Madang Podcast, hosted by the Christian Century.
Hi, Grace. Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, so great to read your very interesting and just page-turning book, Story Work. But before we get in there, you started Inner Story Writing Circle, which is really fascinating to me. So for the listeners, can you share a little bit about how you started this and what it is, and if people can join it?
Sure. I started the Inner Story Writing Circle because I wanted a consistent community, first and foremost for myself, because I'm the founder and I guide the programming, but I'm also really think of myself as a member. I created the community that I needed, right? I used to do one-off workshops and was constantly coming up with ideas for how I wanted to share tools for writing with people like me who were writing about their lives in different forms, whether it's books, essays, blogs, whatever. and who wanted to combine both the creative development, like the craft and the technique, but also with healing and fit in the therapeutic side of writing, to bring those two worlds together and navigate all the emotional and strategic challenges that come with bringing those two things together. So instead of doing one-off workshops, I thought it would be a cool experiment to see, well, what if I can offer something like a club or a
Mm,
membership that people would often attend my workshops and say, how can I keep this going? How do I, maintain this inspiration that I feel? So I felt like the calling to create
uh-huh.
something for that. And that's where the Inner Story Writing Circle was born.
So is it a in-person thing or is it online?
It's
How do you,
online.
it's online?
It's
Okay.
online. We have writers, and both writers who are writing for the public and also just writing for themselves all over the world. And
Oh,
we locally, I live in the DC metro area in Maryland,
oh,
actually.
uh-huh,
And we also do occasional meetups in person
uh-huh.
just to have that face-to-face connection. But I actually started it towards the end of the pandemic. So I was really utilizing the virtual world at that time to find the people who were seeking out a community like that.
Wow. So anyone can join or how is it free? Is it member? You have to pay membership or?
Yep, it's a paid membership. It's a paid
Oh,
membership, but
uh-huh,
yeah, anyone can join who feels aligned with that mission of
uh-huh.
using writing as a tool for healing and for expression in creative projects that they want to bring out into the world.
Wow, that's really good. I think that's really needed. There are so many writers who need that support group sometimes because,
Yeah.
I know so many people who start and then never finish because,
Mhm.
yeah, you don't have that community or the
Mhm.
support. So this sounds really good. So for the listeners, you can kind of Google Inner Story Writing Circle and join this writing circle. I think that it sounds great. So thank you for starting it. And I guess it's been 5 years then.
No, Inner Story Writing. Wow, has it? No, no, no. It started in 2023. So it's
Oh,
only been a
okay.
couple years.
Oh,
So
a
I've
couple
been
years.
work
Okay.
yeah, yeah. I've
Okay.
been
You said
working
pandemic, so I was like, okay, 2020.
right, right. It was
Okay.
like towards the end of it. And
Oh,
when
okay.
leading up to it, I was doing more like the one-off
Uh-huh.
workshops here and there. But
Oh,
yeah,
okay.
I think the pandemic and
Uh-huh.
the way we all kind of gathered and found community online is what was really sped up that process though.
Oh, I see. Well, that
Mhm.
sounds interesting. So for all the Madang podcast listeners, please join if you're interested about the healing stories or writing about them, etc. So today we are here on Madang Podcast to talk about your latest book, Story Work. I found it fascinating because it's like part memoir, part, you're telling us how to heal and how to write, and like it's just a lot of stuff in one book. So before we begin, to say something about the title. You do talk about it in the book, but it's a very interesting title, Story Work. So tell us how you came up with the title.
Sure. The title came from me wanting to have a way to describe my unique approach to storytelling and
Mhm.
self-discovery, two words that kept coming through when people would ask me what I do. What kind of writer are you? What kind of writing do you do? What kind of coach are you? And I was like, well, I writing for self-discovery. I help people use writing as a tool for this. And my unique approach is to, in addition to self inquiry and reflection prompts, we very much use memory, mining our memories, telling
Mhm.
stories, looking for examples of how certain patterns that we discover through our self discovery work are showing up in our lived experience. And so it's this combination of the two, the self discovery and the storytelling, that really defines what I do and how I help people use writing as a tool.
Mhm.
So it kind of came together that way. I was like, it's this story, this inner work of changing, reclaiming your story. So for a while there, the title of the book originally was, I think a few working titles I had were Reclaiming Your Story. I had titled it All the Many Layers because that's the name of my website. And, like that title came from exploring all the layers of your life and exploring
Uh-huh.
all the things. And story work, it was one of those just downloads, one of those aha moments, I guess, right? Sometimes as like creatives, we have those moments where something just sort of pops into your head. And I was like, that's catchy. And
Uh-huh.
that could be something that really does encapsulate these two, what I'm saying here is that it does take this inner work to mine your memories, look at your lived experience as your creative material, and do that work to reclaim the direction of your life through your narrative and the way you show up and the way you talk about your life. So it just kind of came together like that.
Wow, that's so interesting. So along that lines, how did you actually begin this book, particular book? Because every book has a story why you started it. So how
Mhm.
did you begin this book?
The book actually started as a memoir journal. Back
Hmm.
in 2016, I was doing a lot of telling myself stories from my childhood and my early young adult life that I had never acknowledged or told myself. And I said, I wanted to make a project out of this. And I had been reading books like Writing as a Way of Healing by Luis DeSalvo and Writing Down Your Soul by Jeanette, I don't know if it's Jeanette or Janet Connor. I was reading these books because I really wanted to figure out how do you use writing as a tool for healing, not just to vent, but to
Hmm.
really use it in a productive way where you're finding a healing narrative instead of staying stuck in the same uh, emotional space and feeling defeated by your story. So it started off with just, well, let me just start off by telling myself these stories, getting them down, finding language for things that I kind of held in my mind and my body. And so I started with that. And I started telling myself these stories. And I found that I really needed to start with a lot of painful things. And when I thought, oh, I have almost a book here, I shared it with a few people. And the
Hmm.
feedback I got really confirmed something that I was feeling but didn't have words for was that I was kind of really still staying in the pain. It was like confessional, it was cathartic, but it was also very much sort of a victim narrative. Like all these things happened to me and it's made life really hard. And that was it. There was no arc to it yet. And
Well,
so
I'm
I,
glad you kind of started in that space
yeah.
because, your book, it is very personal. So you did say you wanted to kind of write this memoir,
Mhm.
like painful stories that you were able to put into the paper. How was that process? Because for me, like you're Black, I'm Asian, Asian American. For our community, it's really hard to write our like if it's someone else's story of pain, it's a little easier. But when
Mhm.
it's your own, it's so hard because we live in this honor shame. So I am sure it was hard for you. You talk about being part of the Black community, etc.
Mhm.
So how was it easy? Was it difficult? Like reading it, I was like, wow, it's very powerful and moving. Was it a difficult thing to do?
It was. It was. I had to really dig deep for my reason and
Yeah.
to push me through, right? Like, I'm not just doing this to expose anything just for shock value. I really have a deep reason for this. And for me, that reason was wanting to end the silence that had
Mm,
been so hard and what had kept me in that victim narrative for a long time because I was like, I felt shame and I felt like I didn't have permission to tell my story. I felt like I would upset people or I was going against the way I had been raised, more so by example than
mm,
anything else. Most of the people who knew my story, and honestly, most of my family members, it'll be a lot of it will be surprise to them too because we don't talk about it in our family.
oh,
We
so
really
they don't
don't.
know.
They know I'm writing a book, but
Uh-huh.
I'm sure that there are
Oh,
layers to my experience that they don't know because we don't talk about it. And I
I see.
needed a place to put it down. And I also needed an actionable way
Uh-huh.
to embody the way I wanted to break that cycle. I have
Uh,
3 kids, and I
uh,
think about wanting to empower them to own
uh-huh.
their stories. And the best way I can do that is by example. That's the absolute best way. I could talk about it all day, but
Uh-huh.
by example, I can really show them this is what this looks like. And I can still on, and I felt like it was very much my duty to share these things, but also to really honor the layers to it. Like, there was silence in my family, but there was also love, and there was also, all these dimensions and multi-dimensional people, and it's not just one thing. So I felt like it was hard, but I felt like it was my calling and my duty that I could transform the shame and the guilt and the confusion and all of those things I talk about in the book into something more meaningful that could be
Mhm.
helpful to not only my kids, but to readers, right? To transform
Yeah.
their emotions as well.
Yeah, because you're not just touching the surface, you go really deep, especially about your mom in the
Yeah.
book. So, before we get into that, you also write at the beginning that writing saved me. When I read that, it was kind of a little shocking to me in one way, but then, yeah, that is true. That's kind of your life kind of work that you've been doing. So you write in the book, it saved me from living a false life, blindly stumbling along my fear and avoidance, settling for the fate that I would always be broken. So if you can kind of share with us how it really saved you from the difficulties that you've been facing throughout your life.
Yeah, I think the weight of carrying these defeated narratives was building up through anxiety, depression, the weight of putting on a brave face. Like I made it through that. That didn't affect me. I did have some tough things in childhood, but I'm strong. I'm strong. I'm resilient, and feeling like as a Black woman, I needed to have this strong exterior, and I couldn't present this, like, to be vulnerable was to be weak, and like, oh, you can't hack it, you can't you know represent your family and your culture in a powerful way if you're talking about these things that aren't you know um shiny, and about accomplishment and all of the things that I was taught that will get you approval and validation. So achievement, I focused on that, and I focused on polished appearance, and all of these things that I thought would mean success and happiness, but peace of mind and the joy of just being able to show up as my full self. I had to go kind of into those dark places so that I could integrate all of that, so I could really show up and authentically be this joyful person I've always been. I've always been silly. I've always been joyful. I've always been friendly. So I wasn't faking that, but I was just hiding these parts of me that I didn't think would be accepted. So that you can only go but so far before that catches up to you,
Mhm.
right? And so in your private time to yourself, when you take the makeup off and you take your work clothes off and you settle down and you're really who you are,
Mhm.
it just becomes harder and harder to wear that mask every day.
Yeah. So, you further talk about how it gave you the language to break the silence. And you wrote, the more I wrote, the more liberated I was. So, for me as a writer, I don't find it so liberating. Most times I'm kind of mad at something and I write about it. But for you, you said it was liberating. So, if you could say a little bit about that.
Mm. It made me feel free to say the things and talk about the things that I had been hiding. And
Mm,
I felt empowered by
mhm,
that, where hiding made me feel wobbly and
mhm,
unstable, and like I'm going to be found out at any time, or someone's going to see these parts of me that I'm trying so hard to pretend aren't there. But when you start taking your power back, like an example might be, I was very ashamed for a long time that I'm estranged from my mom, that I don't talk to her, we've separated. And so that anytime someone would bring that up, or I didn't want people to know, I was ashamed of that. And then I would have to tell this whole story. But when I started owning it, I
mhm,
was like, anybody, like, people can say whatever they want, they can have whatever their opinion. I've owned it. Like, once you claim it for yourself and you have your own sense of meaning, then you don't feel like the fear of judgment like you used to. So for me, that liberation of not worrying about what people think. I still think about what people think, but I don't let it it doesn't define my worth or like how my identity or how I feel about myself. And I
Mhm.
needed that to feel truly, like you mentioned earlier, I said I felt broken because I was, just kind of these compartmentalized aspects of myself, but bringing it all together and reclaiming it as all part of like my story, all of those parts are valid, made me feel much stronger and much more liberated.
Mm. So, the book is, your life story kind of with especially your mom, that came up a
Mhm.
lot. And in the book, I thought a very important point, especially for readers, is when you stated that the difficulties that shaped you don't have to define you. I thought that was
Mhm.
so good because so many of us allow that to define us for the rest of our life. So if you can say a little bit about, what that actually means and how we can kind of live by your word there.
Yes, definitely. That was my story. One of the first books I ever wrote was self-published.
Mhm.
And the tagline was, I had decided that I was a broken girl who grew up with a broken mother and would ever just have this broken life. Like I just had that belief in
Mhm.
my life that no matter what I accomplished or what good I did in the world, I would always be hindered by my childhood and these experiences, and that I would just always be a bit broken. And for a long time, I even wore that as a badge of honor. Like I call it my sad girl era. Like I was writing all this sad poetry and I was just like, broken and damaged. And like it was just part of my identity that I
Uh-huh.
would always be a little bit broken, a little bit flaky, just kind of out there. And it was a season that was necessary because I realized when I got beyond that, and especially in my writing, I was like, I felt like I only could write about pain.
Mm.
And I got to a point in my life where I was like, but there's joy and there's the things that I'm interested in and passionate about. There's so many other things, but I'm stuck in this identity, right? That I can't grow beyond unless I give myself that permission to grow beyond it. So it required me to really take a look at myself and say, why am I clinging to this identity? Yes, these are things that happen, but does that mean I need to stay in that place? And sometimes when we try to expand out of it, it feels very uncomfortable. And I think that's why a lot of people stay stuck. They believe that that's who they are. And they just say, well, this is just how I am. And I used to say that, well, this is just how I am. And so losing that identity makes you feel very untethered. Like, well, who am I now? If I'm not this person who suffered this abandonment or this abuse or this addiction or whatever that your story is, if you're not that person, then it's scary to think, well, who am I then? Who am I? How do I define myself now? But it's so worth stepping
Mhm.
outside of that box that we keep ourselves in and just imagining. And that's what I talk about in the book, and imagining, well, what else could be true? Like, what else could I do with this pain or this experience or whatever, story that you're reclaiming?
Yeah, so you do talk about, some of us can say, well, these are the cards I've been dealt with,
Yeah.
so that's it. But you
Yeah.
said, rather than that, you said, what hope can I create with the cards I've been dealt with? I thought that was really fascinating for you to write
Yeah.
that.
Yes, yes. I decided that instead of just living with the cards that I'd been dealt in a defeated way, I could think
Mhm.
creatively. That's where that creative courage comes into it. The courage to think about it differently and use your creative mind to just imagine, well, maybe there's other people who feel like this. And since I love writing and I love talking about writing, and these are my interests and my gifts and etc., maybe I could somehow bring together those things to empower other people, and I could do something else with this energy,
Yeah.
right? It doesn't go away. You just
Mhm.
find a different way to relate to it and something else to do with it.
Yeah. So your book is beyond like your story. It's not a biography, although there is your life story attached to it. But there's a lot of
Mhm.
practical things in your book, which I really appreciated. So you give an example of like a self-discovery prompt. So, where are you in your life? What are you currently hiding from, et cetera, and writing down memories. So for our listeners, I'm really hoping that they'll go buy your book, Storywork. But what are some of the exercises that you have in your book that can really help us, for those of us who feel a lot of pain? It can be different kinds of pain. It could be physical,
Mhm.
emotional, spiritual, or mental pain.
Mhm.
How is storytelling or story writing going to help? So I know you give some practical points and stuff. So if you
Mhm.
could share that with us.
Sure. One of my favorites that started off as a practice that I would share in my workshops is using the seven basic plots. So if whether you're a writer or not, you've heard of some of these plots, like rags to riches stories, right? Like Cinderella's a rags to riches story, or Overcoming the Monster, which is like David and Goliath. These are very common storytelling plots that screenwriters and novelists and, you know, all different types of art that we consume. It includes these types of plots. So, a very practical way to use writing along with your story is to think, in what ways do I have a rags to riches story or a rebirth story? And thinking of your life and your creative material, things that you've been through, where maybe you started off like I think rags to riches, I'll use that as an example. You started off very poor in a certain area, maybe poor in love or poor in money or poor in friendship, or something was lacking in your life. And how could you take that and see how that might become a rags to riches story, and how you joined a club or went to school and found your community and now you're rich in friendship? And it's using these plots to plug in your life material and see, like I mentioned earlier, like at first when I started writing, I didn't have an arc. I was just kind of stuck in the painful part. You can
Mhm.
see that life is showing you how there's more to the story. If you continue that arc and look for how it evolved, the overcoming the monster, what monsters have you had to overcome? Or maybe are you still overcoming addiction, abusive relationships, challenges that we all face in these different forms? What is the conceptual monster in your life? And tell the story of how you're overcoming that. Those are such practical ways that we can use writing and storytelling in our own, and you don't have to share it with anyone. It could just be for you, and it's so rewarding to actually see how that story helps you to imagine things in a different way.
Mhm.
Another one that I really love is I talk about using affirmations in the
Mhm.
book to change your narrative, because a lot of what we're talking about there is reclaiming even just the way we think and the beliefs that we give energy to. And for many of us, writing affirmations can feel um, challenging when we we're saying the things, we're saying those positive mantras, and deep down we don't really believe what we're saying. This is something I dealt with. There were certain affirmations I could say and I could truly believe them, but there were certain ones I think that come from many of our like core wounds, that,
Mhm.
like, for example, I'm safe, right? Just simple, I'm safe as an affirmation. I could say that all day and I did not feel safe. I did not feel emotionally safe.
Mhm.
I'm worthy. For a long time, I did not feel worthy. I did not feel deserving. And so, how do I work on that part of me that doesn't feel safe, that doesn't feel worthy? So, I offer an exercise in the book that helps you to connect this sort of aspirational belief that you want to have, you want to feel worthy. Well, think about what are some of the things that actually make you feel worthy. Well, I feel worthy when I help someone. I feel worthy when I share my knowledge or my passion about this topic with someone, or whatever the example is. And then you create a statement that includes that. I feel worthy when, and it creates like this bridge, or like these accessible steps you can take to eventually be able to just say, I'm worthy, and believe it. So sometimes we need some baby steps between
Mhm.
where we are and where we want to be. So I
Mhm.
hope that the exercises in the book provide different ways you can play with language and you can play with storytelling to help people get there.
Oh, that's so helpful. So thank you so much for elaborating on that, Gigi. That's really helpful. So when you talk about your mom, it is really mental health issue. And then you also tie in some of the mental health issues with the church, in
Mhm,
that you say, in the church, it's always kept behind doors. And I
mhm,
don't think it's just the Black church, it is
mhm,
kind of cross all churches.
mhm.
So, what are we supposed to do about this? Or do you have any suggestions or offerings? You do tackle it in your book.
Yes, I talk a lot in the book about my experience growing up in the 80s and 90s in a Baptist church and and just even in my family, right? The culture of my family was if you're having some type of mental distress or emotional distress, you give it to God.
Mhm,
And that for us, my mom definitely was very religious,
mhm,
and she became even more so as her illness progressed. She became even more so.
um,
But that took away the ability to then acknowledge that there was more help that was needed beyond, like, I feel like therapy and mental health resources and support are there because God provides a world where we have options, and we can use our we can have our needs met through these different forms. So I think that it was misleading at the time. I think that things have gotten much better. I'm not as involved in church as I used to be, but I think that things have gotten much better, where before it was perceived that your faith isn't strong enough if you go to a doctor or if you use these resources that are out there. Whereas now I think it's more understood that these resources are God given. They're here because God is saying, here, these things can help you. Not that they're perfect, right?
mhm,
But that you can navigate and use your intuition and like the spirit to discern
mhm,
and find those resources that are right for you. I
mhm,
think that it's getting better. I do have hope and optimism that it is better than it used to be in certain spaces.
mhm,
But at the time, it just wasn't, it was still very stigmatized. It was still very taboo. It was still supposedly this reflection of, like, well, you need to have more faith. And I still hear that narrative sometimes, particularly from elders or from people who are just sort of set in their ways in that aspect. But um, I now definitely see that there is more than one way to approach mental illness, right? There are so many options out there, and it's just a matter of getting resourced, getting educated, and figuring out what's right for you or your family member and going
mhm.
from there.
Yeah, so I grew up in the 70s and 80s too. So, like in the very kind of conservative churches, it
Mhm.
was like you were possessed. That's how many people in
Yeah.
the church thought of mental
Mhm.
illness. So,
Mhm.
that movie Exorcist, or there were a few
Mhm.
of those where exorcisms were done. Yeah, people in the church thought that was real. That's what you needed
Yeah.
to do to people with mental illness. So the church has come a long way, but still, I am sure there are still those who believe you're possessed by the demon. And people do misread some of those biblical passages, etc.,
Mhm.
and the people around Jesus. So it is really hard. So I'm glad you're tackling a difficult topic. And I know you're dealing with it with your mom, and it's just a broad topic. You also
Mhm.
bring in Dr. James Penbaker from the University of Texas,
Mhm.
and how he uses the traumatic experience. And I thought that was really interesting. And he used a method called expressive writing. If you could
Mhm.
just tell us quickly, like short kind of summary of what that is for
Yeah.
those who are kind of interested, because many of us live with trauma or something that's been really hard. So it may be really helpful. I'm hoping that people will just go and get your book, but just share with us what this expressive writing is.
Expressive writing is a very powerful practice that anyone can experiment with. Essentially, what you do is, well, Dr. James Pennebaker did a study with people who had experienced a traumatic event. In my workshops, I use his method with some slight tweaks. Like, it doesn't have to be a traumatic event. It could just be something that there's a lot of emotional charge around that you want to work through. And this is a way to do it in a safe way. Right?
Mm,
Taking care of yourself as you do it so you're not re-traumatizing yourself. And I find that it's also very helpful as a creative practice because it helps you really break down what you want to say. So the
mhm,
first step is to think about just the facts of what happened, no feelings. So you're using your observation skills. You're kind of putting yourself as a fly on the wall. What did you see, hear, taste, smell, touch? What was going on? What year it was? Just any facts you can think of related to the event. Then you take a break. Step away for a little bit, maybe 15, 20 minutes, maybe a day, however long you want to step away. When you come back, you look at your facts, and then this next step is to write your feelings. What were you feeling when the event happened? You might use the facts to help you remember, like, how did you feel about the weather, or how did you feel about what that person said, or how did you feel? Just all the emotions and the feelings that you felt at that time. That
mm,
probably can be the most challenging step, is to really just be gentle with yourself and
mm,
remember. And you're not writing prose here, right? You're just writing sentence fragments, just, raw, just brain dump, like a list or whatever, to get the thoughts out of your head and onto the page. Then you take a break, right? So you write for, just maybe limit yourself to like an hour or tops 30 minutes to an hour, then take a break. Then you come back, and that final step is the meaning. What meaning do you assign to what happened now, right? What did you learn from it? What questions do you still have from it? What is your hindsight reflection on it now? Looking at the facts, looking at how you felt about it then, how do you feel about it now? And really just looking for the wisdom, the lessons, the what you can extract from it that is meaningful, that you can use in your life now to help you navigate the the ripple effects of it, or challenges you might be facing because of it in your life now. How can you use it in a constructive way now? Those are the three steps. And then from there, you can, make it into an essay if you want. You can make it into a poem. You can write a story, a fictional story from it. You can do whatever you want with it, or you can just leave it at that and just take the nourishment from breaking it down for yourself that way and processing it, having language for what happened, extracting meaning from it. His research shows that this process lowers blood pressure, strengthens your immune system. It's amazing
mhm,
how just finding meaning can
mhm,
help you feel more like this emotionally charged or traumatic thing that happened to you is more integrated into who you are and less acute, right? Like less, like it feels more like a scar than a wound when you've
mhm.
worked through it in that way.
Mm. Wow, that the blood pressure just got me there because I am dealing with high blood pressure. And I want to let the readers know, your book is not just for those who want to write professionally. It's,
Right.
journaling, which is healing. So that is kind of an art form that, I grew up with, but less and less people are doing it, I feel. I think it just, so much social media and our computers,
Mhm.
etc. But
Mhm.
yeah, so I just want to make clear for those who are listening to this podcast episode. Um, One of the really interesting part of your book is when you talk about the Japanese philosophy, and I thought, wow, that's very interesting. I'm interested because I'm Asian American, but you
Mhm.
talk about the three faces. So if you
Yeah.
could share with us what the three faces in that Japanese philosophy is.
Yes, yes. So the first one is just the face that you show to yourself, right?
Mhm.
Like this is your identity, how you know yourself to be, and you don't share that with anyone else, right? There's parts of that self that you might not even really be open with about yourself, right?
Mhm.
You might be because of whatever fears you have or whatever conditioning you might have. The second face is the one you show to other people. This is sort of your, okay, I'm showing up to work, or I'm showing up even with my family, or with in public, that persona that we all have, that image. And the third one is the freedom, right?
Mm.
This is how you show up This is like your soul, your authentic self. This is what we want to get back to.
Mm-hmm.
And I find that that I found that breakdown to be really empowering, to really take an honest look. Each of us can take a really honest look at ourselves and realize that there's truth to that, and that there are um, ways we show up with our coworkers that are different than ways that we show up with this friend group or that friend group or this partner. And part of my journey has been trying to integrate all of the different ways that I've felt like, first of all, question why I'm showing up differently in these different places, and how I can integrate, and who am I really? What is the I believe that our journey in life is really to get back to our whole authentic self, like without all of the ways we've tried to shapeshift ourselves to fit in or to get approval or to achieve or whatever the things are. How do I get back to what stands true and grounded through all of that? Like, what's the core that's really who you are, and how do we get back to that, so that I find that life is much simpler when I can just be that one self in all of these environments, and it be
Mm-hmm.
okay, and feel safe doing that. And that's not something that happens overnight, right? Like, it's something that we can strive towards, and believe is possible, and know that that worthy self is been there all along, and
Mm-hmm.
it deserves to lead the way and to be in the driver's seat. So I'm still working on that.
Oh, well, thank you for sharing that. There's so much richness in your book as you weave in your story and all of this other philosophy and these professors' research. The one question I would like to close is near the end of the book, you write this four-step creative process, to really cultivate a lifestyle that centers on self-care. So if you can just quickly tell us what these four steps are? Because I found them very interesting and enlightening to me.
Yes, yes. The creative process
Yeah,
really is a way to approach, if you're a creative, it's a way to approach your idea development when it comes to whatever creative project you're working on. Or if you don't identify as a writer or creative, it's just, I believe that life is a creative process, right? We're telling our story, we're living our story every day. We're having to solve problems and make decisions. So you can use this for either any of those scenarios. It essentially is a way of thinking about how our ideas develop, how things are created. And it came from the original process was created by a psychologist named Dr. Graham Wallace. And there's more iterations of the research that's been done many times since then. But the four-step creative process is, the first one is to observe. And this is just living a life where you have your ideas, you have your problems you're trying to solve, you're trying to learn and evolve in life. So you just live in a state of observation. How do you take in the world around you? Do you do it with a creative lens, right? Are you looking to have conversations that are meaningful and that spark ideas, where you're talking about your interests? Are you reading books? Are you listening to podcasts that spark your ideas and that feed your interests and your gifts? Are you going to shows and museums and wherever, I don't know, textile stores, wherever you go that you feel inspiration? Are you living your life in such a way to gather inputs that inspire you? And many of us who are so busy and overwhelmed and burnt out and just trying to like live a check off the box type of life, we're not making room for those things. And then we wonder why we feel burnt out, and we wonder why we don't feel inspired. We're looking for meaning. So just living that life of mindful observation. So if you are familiar with the concepts of mindfulness, it's just noticing and being really intentional to give yourself inputs that make you feel intrigued with life and full of wonder and all those things. The second step is to incubate. That
Mhm.
means that you have to rest. We can't always be thinking, analyzing, figuring out. We have to let our minds go out of that thinking mode and go
Mhm.
into the default mode, which is a mode where we're just kind of like stream of consciousness floating, right? Sometimes that, for many of us, turns into rumination, where we're
Mhm.
thinking about that argument and what I should have said. And it's like, we're catastrophizing, or we're thinking about spiraling in a way. But when you recognize that that time of incubation is so important to just for your imagination and for your resilience and for your creative process, then you can use time when, let's say, you're just driving or you're taking a shower, you're cleaning your house, doing dishes, cooking, all of these things that are sort of automatic. Your mind goes into this sort of flow state. And if you are observing and giving yourself these inspiring inputs, you can try to be more intentional about using that time to just daydream, imagine, um, think about something that feeds your curiosity and your imagination, and ideas will start to come, little connections and aha moments will start to happen. And so we need to rest. We need to buffer our days so that we can sit and look out the window. We can take a walk and just let our mind wander. Like children, they just need time to sit. They need time to play, but they also need time to just daydream and goof off and whatever, because their mind is so active in during those times. We need that too. Our inner artist needs that as well. So it's time to rest and incubate. So if you're working on a book and you feel like, oh, I can't get this idea to come through, I'm just banging my head against the desk, go take a walk. Right? Go cook a meal and just let it go. And you are co-creating with something bigger than you, and let that co-creative process happen. The world, like life, will bring that connection to you if you give yourself time to incubate on it. The next step is illumination. So if you've ever had that aha moment when maybe you're doing something else, or maybe sometimes that illumination moment happens when you didn't even feel like writing that day, but you're just like, oh, this is the time. I said I'm going to sit and work on this, I'm going to journal, I'm going to write. I don't feel like doing this, but you show up. And there's this quote I love. I can't remember who it's by, but it says something to the effect of, don't wait for inspiration to find you. Like, no, it says, don't wait for inspiration to strike, let it find you working. So if you just show up, a lot of times the flow will find you. That aha moment will find you. It'll surprise you when you're just kind of
That's
like,
nice.
trudging along. So you're doing something else and this aha moment comes. So I always ask my clients and workshop participants, what are the habits that allow you to be ready when that insight comes, right? Are you showing up for that journaling practice, even if you feel like, oh, I'd rather be doing something else? Are you showing up for it? Are you creating space in your days for these moments? And when they come, are you honoring them? Are you writing your ideas down, those little connects, even if it's just a fragment, even if it's just a breadcrumb? Do you have a little notebook in your bag, or do you have an app in your phone where you can write your ideas down? Treat it like, I always say, treat it like money. Like if you just found $1, would you just be like, oh, it's just $1? No, you would put it in, you would put it away somewhere safe, right?
That's good.
So
Yeah.
right, treat your ideas that way, because it's a gift. So you really have to treat it like a gift. So that's illumination. And then the final one is called verification. And that's where that's like your concentrated,
Mm,
intentional time to create. That's
mhm,
when you, whatever it is, again, it could be problem solving or working on a creative project. That's when you sit down and you figure out your budget, or you figure out a plan for something you want to accomplish in life. Oh, I want to move to Europe. Sit down and work on the plan. And that's where you're taking all these inputs and all the things you've been doing, and you actually dedicate time to bringing it to life. You're working on your book, you're meeting with your creative partner to brainstorm ideas. Whatever that intentional time looks like, how are you? It's not going to fall into your lap. You have to be intentional, right? You have to schedule it. You have to make the phone call. You have to do whatever action is required for
mhm.
you to bring that idea that you've been developing, or that calling you have, or whatever it is, into form. So that's that final step of verification.
Oh. Well, thank you so much for sharing the 4 steps. It's so helpful, and I'm sure I'm going to be using them too. So thank you so much, Gigi, for coming on Madang Podcast, hosted by the Christian Century. It was a joy to meet you over this interview, and I just really appreciate your work and the book. So all the listeners, please go out and get Storywork, Field Note on Self-Discovery, and Reclaiming Your Narrative from Broadleaf Books. So thank you so much, Gigi, for coming on.
Thank you for having me, Grace. This has been awesome.
Thank you. Please join Homebrewed Christianity's Theology Beer Camp in St. Paul, Minnesota this October for a 3-day theological experience. It brings together theology nerds and craft beer for a blend of intellectual engagement, community building, and lots of fun. Go to www.theologybeercamp2025.com to save your spot. Also join Homebrewed Christianity's online class, God of Justice. Across our communities and the world, there is a growing recognition of deep-rooted injustices and an urgent passion for creating a more beautiful, equitable world. How do we move forward? Please visit www.homebrewedchristianity.com to register for this important online class, God of Justice. This episode of Madang Podcast is brought to you by the support of Broadleaf Books. In story work, memoirist Renee Hill invites readers to the transformative practice of creative self-discovery. Through essays and prompting questions, Gigi uses the raw material of her own story of being raised by a schizophrenic mother to help readers take action and reclaim the power of their own narrative. Please visit www.broadleafbooks.com to order story work and to view all of Broadleaf Books' important, powerful, and exciting books.
For sponsorship inquiries, please email madangpodcast.gmail.com.